Alright everyone, so today's video is going to be another general election prediction video. This time this prediction is going to include swing states, so these are basically going to be the toss-ups, the true toss-ups. I'm going to mark as swing, which are states that are going to be within 2 points and are going to be very close 2020 election, and at least at this point it doesn't seem like there's a clear favorite for the state as of yet, and we'll get to those states as we go throughout the video. But please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and we're going to jump right into it. So we're going to go west to east, starting with the state of Nevada. If we look at 2016, of course, Hillary Clinton won the state of Nevada by 2.4 percentage points. Of course, the areas where she did well, where she won 2 counties in Nevada, Washoe and Clark County. Clark County, of course, being the most populous county in Nevada, she won that by around 11 percentage points. And of course, Washoe County, the second most populous county in Nevada, she won by 1.3 percentage points. So it's interesting to look at in 2012, Barack Obama won this state by 6.7. The margin here is only 2.4. So obviously the state has gotten a lot more competitive. I'm sure third parties also had a play in that as well, but also if we were to rule those out, both candidates would probably have a higher share of the vote, which means Nevada was a lot closer this time around. Of course, in terms of polling, RCP really doesn't have any Nevada polls that are of late. The most recent Nevada poll has Biden up by around 4 percentage points, but overall, there's not a lot of polling. Of course, Emerson tends to favor Republicans. Of course, this poll, 47 to 40, is very, very inaccurate. So ultimately, Nevada is probably going to be one of those toss-up states purely because of the margin, and also we really don't know yet how much of a lead Biden has. And of course, you have these likely Ds, but again, this is based on the long-term trends. Niskanen here, this polling agency is very terrible, because if you look at what they've rated other races that are clearly way more competitive, or more of an advantage of the Republicans, they always favor the Democrats in their polling. I personally see this as a toss-up. I don't care what these other polling agencies say. I think Nevada is going to be really close in 2020, whichever way it goes. So that's going to be the first state we're going to mark as swing. The next state we're going to look at is, of course, Arizona. If we go back to 2016, Donald Trump won Arizona by 3.5 percentage points. This is the smallest margin a Republican has won the state since 1996. If we look at, of course, the counties where Trump did very well in, Maricopa County he won, which is the most populous county here in Arizona. And basically, in order to carry the state, you have to carry Maricopa. Kyrsten Sinema in 2018 carried Maricopa by 5. Donald Trump carried it by around 3 points or so, 3.1. It tends to vote right in line with the state. Hillary Clinton did very well in Pima County, which in 2012 was a lot closer. Again, if we look at 2012, Mitt Romney won by 9 points. 3.5 is a much narrower margin of victory in the state of Arizona, and I think most of that comes from the people that went from voting for Trump or would have voted for Trump and voted for third parties. Again, this is going to be a state that's also very close. If we look at the polling from Arizona, of course, the RCP aggregate's not the most accurate in the world, but Biden is significantly up in a lot of the polls. I'm still very skeptical. Of course, polls like Univision are biased towards Democrats. They're always going to give Biden a huge lead in any of their polls, even if it's in a red state. Usually you notice that. But the main thing here is that there's a lot of polling. Biden is favored, but then again, we're still too far out to actually determine which way this state's going to go. Trump won by 3.5 here, Romney by 9.1, and McCain, which this was his home state, only won by 8.5. So overall, the polling is not that accurate. If we go to Arizona on the Wikipedia polls, they show a much closer race. A lot of these polls are within the margin of error. This one has a 5-point margin of error. But Joe Biden's consistently leading in the polls. But every other polling agency has this race as a toss-up, except Niskanen. Again, not a really reliable polling agency. I think the only way you can categorize Arizona now is a complete swing state. I usually put it as tilt red, or even sometimes lean red. But I think now that you look at it, the fact that Biden's favored, and again, this doesn't mean all that much, because there are several states where the Democrat, last time Hillary Clinton was again up in the polls, and Trump overperformed. So we don't actually know yet. I'm going to put Arizona as a swing state as well, because that's just being intellectually honest, because, in all fairness, we really don't know if Arizona is going to go red or blue. You could look at more detailed polling data and kind of find out which way, but I think these two are true toss-ups, but I don't really want to keep the map gray, so I'm just going to call them swings because toss-ups right there. The state of Colorado, if we go back to 2016, Hillary Clinton won Colorado by 4.9 percentage points, which is a slightly less lead, which is a smaller lead from Obama's 5.4 percentage point win in 2012. Of course, Hillary Clinton did really well in Denver, the Denver suburbs, Jefferson County. Trump's strong spots were El Paso. He actually won Pueblo County, which is kind of a toss-up county to begin with. Sometimes it goes blue, sometimes it goes red, but usually the state as a whole goes blue anyway. This state has the potential to be somewhat close, but again, we could look at some polling out of, well, they're not going to really have any Colorado polling. Colorado's another state that they don't poll because a lot of these states that went blue last time are not being paid attention to. But if we look at the recent polls, yeah, Biden's up quite a bit. There's not a single poll where Trump's even close to Joe Biden. Everyone else has this as likely or lean. Doesn't mean all that much, but I think at the end of the day, the margin is going to be within 2 to 5 points. That would categorize it for me as a lean Biden state. I think that's pretty apparent. The Senate race as well is probably going to be fairly close, so that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But again, I still favor the Democrats in Colorado for all the 2020 races. New Mexico is an interesting state. If we go back to 2016, New Mexico went to Hillary Clinton by 8.3 percentage points. This is the smallest margin the state has gone for a Democrat since, I believe, 2000, which was the last time it went blue very narrowly for Al Gore. I think it was 300 votes or so. But again, Hillary Clinton won a sizable victory. Barack Obama won the state by 10.1 percentage points. This isn't a state that should be fairly close, but it has the potential to be. Of course, there's not going to be any RCP polls, so we'll have to go to Wikipedia and find their polls. Not Arizona. There we go. And of course, there's one poll that has Trump only down by 8 points. But again, this is a two-person poll. A more honest poll has 52-40. I don't think the margin is going to be that high. A lot of pollsters have this as safe or likely, but New Mexico has actually trended more Republican in terms of general elections since 2016. We can go back to the 2016. We want to go to the trends. The trends from 2012. If we look at the state of New Mexico, all but 4 counties trended more Republican, and some of these rural counties trended more heavily so. Now, again, these are not very vote-heavy, vote-populist counties, but Santa Fe County is significant. This trended more Republican. Democrats actually lost votes, but so did Republicans. Albuquerque did trend blue, so that's not really good news for Republicans. But the third-party vote here was so high that it's very hard to tell which way the state would have gone. But if we take, for example, Trump getting maybe 60% of Gary Johnson votes if they were forced to vote for him, that would put him around 44 percentage points. Of course, Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton getting maybe 80% of Stein voters and 40% of Johnson voters. So that would be something more like 52-44. So still a sizable lead for Democrats. But again, this would be a state to watch. I don't think there's going to be a lot happening here. Again, this is a state with only 5 electoral votes, almost at 6. So, although not that vote heavy, I still put this state as likely Democratic for the presidential race, which is anywhere from 7 to 15 points. Although it could be as low as 5 points, the margin. But I still think Joe Biden's favored here. Something that could play to his detriment, though, and I'll make a point about this, is that if Joe Biden focuses his attention, of course, on the Rust Belt, which he should, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and these are the states he wants to win back to win the White House. Maybe he goes down to Florida. I think it would be a bit ridiculous if he tried Georgia or Texas. Going to Arizona wouldn't be all that far-fetched either, but his path to victory essentially is right here, the Rust Belt. And if Trump actually does campaign in New Mexico and Biden is just absent, that could increase Republican voter turnout. I'm not saying it will flip the state, but it could definitely be a little bit closer on Election Day than many people expect. So now on to the state of Texas. If we go back to 2016, Texas went to Donald Trump by 9 points. This is the narrowest margin for a GOP candidate since 1996, when I believe Bob Dole won it by around 5 points, maybe? No, it might have been since 1992, because I think that was only a 3-point margin for Bob Dole. But either way, this is the closest Texas has been in recent history, since the 90s, since it basically solidified itself as a red state. But But this is still a sizable victory for President Trump. But then again, this is not very impressive. Although if we look at Hillary Clinton's percentage of the vote, she got the same percentage roughly as Obama in 2008. She got a little bit more than Obama did in 2012. So ultimately, like, this is kind of a margin expected by Democrats. It's where Trump fell a bit short. If Trump had gotten, say, 55% of the vote, that'd be 13-point margin. That would be a pretty healthy lead for the state of Texas presidentially. Statewide, it tends to be more Republican, of course, since a lot of the midterm and local races have higher Republican turnout. Of course, in 2018, we were all surprised when Beto O'Rourke almost unseated Ted Cruz and really rode the blue wave, so-called, in the state and got the margin down to around 2 points or so. So again, if we go back to trends, if we look at how Texas trended since 2012, we're having numbers all over the place. A lot of the southern, predominantly Hispanic counties trended more Republican, including Hidalgo County, which is very interesting. Democrats lost votes, Republicans gained votes. That's very interesting. So a lot of these southern Texas counties went slightly more red. Of course, the areas that went much more blue, of course, are these suburban and urban counties. Dallas, Fort Worth got a lot closer. Democrats gained votes in Fort Worth, in Tarrant County. Republicans lost votes. That's not good for them. Dallas County, same situation. Republicans lost votes. Democrats gained a sizable amount. That's why the margin was so large. Collin and Denton County as well were counties that weren't even close in 2012, and then in 2016 got within the 20-point margin, which is fairly interesting. Of course, places like Jefferson County trended slightly more Republican. This is a county that actually went to Obama in 2012, actually flipped to Trump. This is a suburban, kind of urban county. I think this is where Beaumont is. It tends to be kind of like a swing county, sort of close anyway. But at the end of the day, Texas has trended all over the place. If Trump could keep these counties trending back Republican in 2016, he would surely do better in the state. Even if Joe Biden's margins stay around stagnant in these rural area, in these urban areas, he could still do fairly well. If we look at polling from Texas, not really much there, but we can go to Wikipedia. In the polling aggregate, Donald Trump is up by 4.6. This is not really surprising. I think the margin is going to be a lot larger than that come 2020 for Donald Trump. I made a video about Texas, all the hype about Texas being purple this year. If you want to go check it out, I'll link it in the description. But basically, I don't really buy it all that much, and in the video I kind of break down why that is. But if we look at the polls here, Donald Trump is consistently up. There's a few polls where Biden's up as well, but they don't really give the margin of error, so there could be a large margin of error. In a lot of the Biden polls, Trump's within the margin of error anyway. But there were some polls back in 2016 where Hillary Clinton was almost tied with Donald Trump in the state of Texas. Now, of course, there's polls where Biden's leading, but that doesn't mean Trump's going to lose the state. Again, everybody has this state as either likely or lean R. RCP puts a lot of states as toss-up for some reason, so I don't really understand why that is. Something worthy of note, the Democratic primary got 2.094 million votes. The Republican primary got 2.017 votes. So it's very interesting that in a primary with really only one viable candidate, the turnout was basically the same. Actually, in 2008, the turnout for the Democratic Party was much higher here in Texas than it was in 2016. So, that could be a sign of something. There was a special election, I think, back in January that was supposed to be very close, and then the Republican won by like 16 points, kind of blowing that out of the water. So ultimately, I'm still going to rate Texas as a likely Republican state due to the state's history and, of course, based on the polls as well. Can't forget about Nebraska's second. There's not really any polls for that. This, of course, is a district that went to Donald Trump by around 2 points, went to Romney as well by a small margin, and actually was won by Obama in 2008. I'm going to put this district as probably lean Republican. I think Donald Trump will win it again by around 2 or so points. I'm not really seeing a big blue shift in the state of Nebraska at the current time. So for now, we're going to put this as lean Republican. Minnesota is a fairly interesting state. If we go to RCP, again, RCP doesn't really have polls for Minnesota all that much, and if we go to Wikipedia, I don't think there's a lot of polls as well. But the consensus here, of course, is that Minnesota is going to be a lean Democratic state. There's only 2 polls on here. Mason-Dixon, I don't really find all that. These are both Mason-Dixon polls. These tend to be biased towards Republicans. In this case, it's not, but I still don't really find these polls very reliable. This one could be accurate, sure. But again, there's a margin of error, and there's also an undecided factor. So again, RCP has this as toss-up because they have everything as toss-up, but everyone else has it as lean Democratic. But of course, there's a lot going on in Minnesota as of now, if you all have been paying attention to the news. And how that could affect the election is anybody's guess. If you noticed on social media, everyone really has their opinions on the Minnesota protests or riots or whatever you want to call them already drawn. Everybody already knows where they stand. Not really many people jumping sides here. So I don't think it's going to have any impact at all based on that factor. Just like I don't think coronavirus at the end of the day is going to have that big of an impact on the 2020 race. And, you know, if you disagree, you can comment below and explain why. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference either way. If we look at the state of Minnesota, the change from 2012, all of the rural areas trended heavily to the Republicans and Donald Trump, of course, and the urban areas trended more Democratic for Hillary Clinton. It could be guessed that if the margins, now they didn't trend all that Democrat, so I think even if the 2012 margins in Hennepin County and here in Ramsey County, if they had stayed, I still think the state would have went blue by around 1.5 points or a little bit more. It's not all that much of a difference. But these rural areas are the counties that really swung the state way more competitive. If we go to if we go to the full results here, this was a point won by Barack Obama. This was a state won by Barack Obama by 7.7 points. And now the margin is like 2.5. So this is a state that has definitely gotten much, much, much closer. And I think this is going to be a state that's going to be watched. And ultimately, people have it as lean Democratic. You know, RCP has it as toss-up. Niskanen probably has it as likely Democrat. Yeah, I didn't even have to, like, really look back at it. Pretty obvious. So ultimately, I think this is going to be one of the toss-up / swing states. Because ultimately, Trump has actually invested in the state of Minnesota. In 2016, there was no campaign in Minnesota. I think Trump had one campaign staffer that was in Minnesota, and then they were later transferred to Colorado. So basically, there's actually going to be a campaign apparatus in the state of Minnesota, and that could make the state very, very close. So I'm going to put this as a swing state. I think just based on that, and, you know, again, if you think the riots are going to help Joe Biden, I'd tend to disagree with you because, again, people that have their opinions on that, we're going to vote one way or the other regardless. Of course, Iowa, we won't talk too much about Iowa because if we look at the results, Iowa went more red than Texas in 2016. A lot of third-party votes here as well, 51-41, and then a whole bunch here in the middle. But of course, if we look at the trends of Iowa, basically, the entire state minus 2 of these rural counties trended Republican. So the entire state heavily, heavily Republican. Probably no polls there. We'll just go to Wikipedia because that makes things easier for us. If we go to Wikipedia polls, Trump is up by around 4. Again, he's been consistently up in all the polls, you know, for the past year and a half or so. So Niskanen, again, not really being honest. RCP again. This is going to be a likely Republican state. And the reason I say that is because I think Iowa has the potential to be closer. But ultimately, it's still going to be in a likely margin. And I don't really think Joe Biden's going to spend a lot of time here in Iowa because this is a state that went pretty heavily to Trump. It's very hard to lose a big lead like that when you have it. But for now, this state definitely looks like it's going to be likely Republican. Wisconsin is an interesting state as well. If we go back to 2016, again, always looking back at 2016, this was one of those states that Trump won by 0.7%. Pennsylvania was the other. So this is a state that's going to be very, very close. If we look at the change from 2012, of course, all these rural areas, big vote baskets up here, and some of these rural counties have a fair amount of votes. They all trended Republican. No shock that the Republican won. The only places that trended more Democrat, Milwaukee, and some of the Milwaukee suburbs, which are actually Republican. But then again, if we look at all of these rural areas trending much more Republican and the urban areas trending more Democrat, that probably leaves the state somewhere in the middle. So this is going to be a state that's fairly close. If we go to Wisconsin RCP polls, Biden's only up 2.7. That's pretty bad for a Democrat to be up so little in the polls. And again, if we go back to 2018, not that midterms are that indicative of general elections, as I like to keep saying on this channel. But again, if we go back to 2018, Scott Walker lost his governor's race by less than 2 points, despite it being a blue wave year. Again, if we go to the Wikipedia polls for the state of Wisconsin, everybody has this state as a toss-up. This is a swing state, and Joe Biden's polling margins here in Wisconsin are very, very poor for him. Hillary Clinton was up by a lot more, and she lost the state. But ultimately, if we're being honest, this is still a state that can go either way, so this is going to be a swing state. Michigan is another very interesting state. This could be the state that decides the election, possibly. Although, then again, any of these swing states, toss-ups, same thing, I guess. Any of these toss-up states could really decide the election anyways. But the state of Michigan, if we go back to 2016 again, nearly the entire state, minus like 4 counties, trended Republican. And of course, no surprise that the Republican won here in the state. Donald Trump's smallest margin of victory in any state, just 0.3%. But this was a state that Barack Obama won, if we go here, by 9.5, and I think before he won it by 16 or 17 points in 2008. This is a state that took a hard turn toward the Republicans and is going to be very competitive in 2020. Very, very competitive. If we go to the polling average, in the RCP aggregate, Biden is doing a lot better in Michigan. He's leading by 5.5, which is a decent margin, but again, in a state like Michigan, the Democrat wants to be up by around 8 points, which is normally a safe polling lead. If we go to some Wikipedia polls here, we can see that the state of Michigan, the polling aggregate heavily favors Biden. Again, it could have been just a fluke that it went red in 2016, and then it will go back. But, mixed results here. Some people have it as toss-up. Niskanen has it as lean. Of course they do. Sabato's crystal ball has it as lean. Inside Elections has it as tilt. Toss-up, generally, my gut instinct would be to make it a lean Democratic state, but as of right now, I'm going to put it as a swing toss-up because really, this is going to be a close state either way. It's not going to be a blowout for Biden if he wins it. Probably be 3 points at most, but I don't even think that's going to be possible for either of the candidates. Michigan's going to be down to the wire whether Trump or Biden wins it. That's how I look at it anyway. The state of Ohio is a state we won't focus too much on because, like Iowa, this is a state that went to Trump by around 8 points. Yeah, Trump won the state by 8 points. Obama won it by 3, so this is a state that swung basically 11 points in the opposite direction in favor of Donald Trump. But again, third-party votes were huge in Ohio. Nearly 6 or 7%, I'm not really good at math, but it's somewhere around there, voted for third parties. So that means, but then again, either way, Trump would have won the state. He got over a majority of the votes. He would have won Ohio by minimum maybe 5 or 6 points. But still, this was a state that on election night actually seemed like it could go either way. But then, of course, as more results came in, it became very clear that Trump was going to win it anyway by a likely margin. We'll look at some polling out of Ohio. Joe Biden's up by 1 in the aggregate, but some of these polls are a little ridiculous. I still think it's going to be a likely Republican state. Even Niskanen has it as lean. I think it's going to be likely. Could be anywhere from like 5 to 10 point margin, but this is going to be a state that Trump wins, I think, either way. I guess we'll go north and go down the eastern seaboard. So, of course, Maine at large in 2016 got fairly competitive. This was around a 3 point something margin. I don't really know the math. Might be 2.9 actually. Yeah, so 2.9 margin. This was a state Obama won by 15 points. Now that's nothing to scoff at. That is a massive, massive swing for the state of Maine. And the question really is that swing is that going to carry out? Is it going to become Republican? Third parties got a huge percentage of the vote here in the state. I think Jill Stein got a lot. She got around 2. I think because most people didn't think Maine was going to be as competitive as it was. Usually it's a blue state, so that's what you would think if you lived in Maine that it would be anyway, and I'm sure a lot of voters probably thought that anyway. But turnout's going to be pretty high in 2020. So if we look at, of course, some polling, I'm not going to really have any there. We're going to have to just go to the trusty Wikipedia. Polling in Maine seems to favor Biden quite a bit. They don't even have an aggregate because there's not a lot of polling here. Most recent poll has Joe Biden up by 10. Lean, likely, toss-up, whatever. Because the state has ranked choice voting, and if you don't know what that is, again, I made a video on it. You can see it in the description below. But since Maine has ranked choice voting, I think ultimately that's going to give the state to Biden by at least a lean margin. So for right now, I'm going to put Maine at large as leans Democratic, which means that, of course, we have the 2nd district. And if we go down here to the 2nd district, Biden's up by 3. I don't think that's going to last. This is a very old poll. Trump won it by 10. I expect him to win Maine 2nd by a similar margin, so I think Maine 2nd will again be likely Republican, whether that's won by 5 points or 4 or whatever. Could be as high as 8 or 9 or 10 or even more. I mean, Maine could definitely flip. But again, I made a video on ranked choice voting. You can go check out that. That's going to favor the Democrats and Joe Biden in this case. So ultimately, I see the state going to Biden by a lean margin. New Hampshire is a really interesting state. Going back to 2016, all of the counties in New Hampshire trended Republican, which made the state obviously closer. If we go to the full results, this is a state that Obama won by 5.6. Hillary won it by 0.3. This is a state that, again, took a massive swing to the right, I guess along with Maine, kind of a New England thing, because these states are the only states that are reasonably within play. Vermont is not going to be in play anytime soon, ever, probably. Massachusetts is not in play, Rhode Island, Connecticut. So these are really the only 2 states in New England that should have some attention on them. The rest of the states are safe blue. But again, this was a state that Trump only lost by 2,000 votes, or 2,000-something votes, with some change, I guess. If we go to... I guess we'll just stay with Wikipedia. I don't know why I keep going to RCP. If we go to the Wikipedia polls for New Hampshire... Biden is up by a small amount. He's up by, in some cases, 8 points, 4 points. But some of these polls, Trump's leading. But again, we don't really have any recent polls. It's the end of May. The last poll is the end of April. Biden's up by 8. I don't really see it. I think this state's going to be very, 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 very close. Come 2020. So ultimately, I'm going to put the state of Maine as a complete toss-up or swing. I think that's the fairest way to put the state of New Hampshire because I think I called it the state of Maine before. But I think that's the fairest way to categorize the state because it swung so massively to the Republicans. And the polling aggregates don't really reflect that the state is getting, tremendously bluer. Of course, Hillary Clinton was up in the polls throughout 2016 in the state of New Hampshire. And again, she barely won it. But she still did win it. So again, I think it's going to be a pure swing or toss-up. Pennsylvania is another state that went to Obama in 2012 but flipped to Trump and ultimately gave him the White House. In the 2016 election, Trump won it by 0.7% or around 50,000 votes, something like that. Gary Johnson got 2.4, but I don't think he played a spoiler effect because most of his votes would have went to Trump anyway. So if we look at the Pennsylvania race, a 0.7% advantage for Trump. Of course, the counties that he flipped from 2012 to 2016 were Erie County, Luzerne County, and Northampton County here. The rest of these counties had been blue already that were blue, but look how close all of these counties got. Center County, Pennsylvania was within 2 points. Dauphin County, Pennsylvania was within 3 points. Lehigh County was within 5. That's pretty close because this county tends to have much larger margins for Democrats than this, so that's good news for Trump. Bucks County, which sometimes goes Republican, sometimes goes Democrat. Trump was 0.8% short. He could easily flip this. Of course, we go down to the Senate race. A lot of these counties did flip. So Pat Toomey did worse in a lot of the rural counties here, which up here are safe for the Republicans. These ones are, I guess, still safe, but not as Republican. But where Pat Toomey did well, of course, were these suburban counties here outside Philadelphia. He won Bucks County by around 5 points. He won Chester County by 2, which if we look, Trump lost Chester County by like 9 points. So that's a pretty impressive pickup for Toomey. And this was the same day, by the way. But places he did weaker, of course, Luzerne County places he did weaker again. Lackawanna County, Monroe County. Lackawanna, again, had a lot of independent votes, but I think still would have been not that close. But ultimately, Pat Toomey won the state by 1.5. This state could be won by Trump again. It could also be picked up by Biden. The polls in Pennsylvania are actually the highest for Biden at 6.5 percentage points. But again, a lot of these RCP polls haven't been taken in a long time. If we go to Wikipedia, which I think just has, for some reason, more updated polls than RCP, or 538 does, Again, the aggregate's roughly the same, but we have some polls where Trump's ahead and some polls where Biden's ahead. And of course, if we were to, nitpick through the aggregate, some of these polls, Biden at 53, Trump at 42, you could throw those out. A lot of these polls where they just don't make sense, they give Biden way too much of an advantage, they throw in here. This state ultimately, again, Niskanen is basically predicting the election for Biden anyway, so they're going to, of course, have this as lean Democrat. Inside Election has this as tilt. Everyone has it as toss-up. I think it's fair to put Pennsylvania in the toss-up category. If we just go back real quick to the trends, though, since 2012, nearly the entire state trended red. Some of the areas that trended the most red, of course, were Carbon County, which was somewhat close in 2012. Now it was not even close. Bucks County trended more red. Even Philadelphia itself trended more red. Republicans gained vote. Democrats lost 4,000 votes. So that's pretty bad for Democrats. Erie County trended heavily to the Republicans. So ultimately, it's all going to depend. What's the turnout of these counties that swung to Trump? And is Trump going to keep them? Is he going to expand the map? Can he get Monroe County? Or can Biden take back Luzerne County, which went to Trump by a safe margin? I don't think Luzerne County is really going to be in play, but you could still win the state without winning Luzerne County. So, of course, Biden could, do better in Bucks County. He could do better here in the Philly metro. He could do better in rural Pennsylvania as well. But it's ultimately up in the air. This is going to be a swing state for sure. So the map right now, Joe Biden has 199 electoral votes to Trump's 189, excuse me. So far, no clear winner. Nobody's really close to 270, but these, again, are the states that I really could consider or see going either way. So that's why I'm including the toss-ups, because I think it's just more intellectually honest to have the toss-ups here, because I really don't know. These states could go either way. Some of these states will go for Trump, some will go for Biden. Virginia is not a state we're going to talk too much about because in 2016, this is a state that Hillary Clinton won by 5.4 points actually, or 5.4 I think. This was a state, of course, Hillary did a lot better in than Barack Obama, who in 2012 won it by 3.9. And, third-party votes were a factor, but again, Hillary Clinton got nearly 50%. She would have won the state either way. But this is a pretty decisive victory, and ultimately, Virginia has trended more blue. If we look at the 2019 state elections, the Democrats swept state government for the first time since the 1990s. I believe since 1993 was the first time they had all chambers of the state government in every statewide office. So ultimately, I don't really see much interest in talking about Virginia much, since we already know which way it's going to go. The change from 2012, all the areas with a lot of people became more Democratic. The rural areas got more Republican, but of course it was completely outdone by a lot of these urban and suburban counties. And suburban Virginia's gotten only more blue. So it would not shock me at all if Virginia went blue in 2020, and I think it's going to. There's not really any polls out of Virginia either. We can go to Wikipedia right here. Oh, so they have some recent polls. The most recent poll is that's a bit ridiculous. Trump will easily get over 40% here. But again, Biden up by 10, Biden up by 5. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. I think Biden's going to win this state by 7. So he's going to win it by a likely margin. So again, not much talking about Virginia really. This is going to be a likely state. Colorado is going to be closer. New Mexico has the potential to be closer, but as of right now, I'm just putting it as likely. So now we're going to look at North Carolina. So again, 2016, Trump won the state of North Carolina by 3.6 percentage points. A pretty decisive lead. Mitt Romney won the state by 2 percentage points, so he turned the state more red effectively. If we go to the trends, of course, a lot of the areas that trended red were a lot of the predominantly blue counties. These are also predominantly African-American counties up here in the state. Cumberland County, interestingly enough, trended more Republican, where Republicans gained votes, Democrats lost votes. That could be an interesting sign for Donald Trump. Of course, either way, whether this is a state that's lean or tilt or whatever, one way or the other, North Carolina is not going to have a margin more than 5 points in either direction. But it definitely has more of a red lean to it, since Trump held on to it by around 3 points. Romney held on to it by 2 in 2012. It narrowly flipped to Barack Obama in 2008 by around 1 point, a little less than 1 point. So ultimately, not much talking about North Carolina. If we look at the polling aggregate, Trump's actually up by 1 here in the RCP average, but some of these polls are recent, some of them are not. I think ultimately the state is going to go to Trump by a lean margin. We can go to Wikipedia. as well, and take a look at what they have the state as. Very interesting. So, obviously, we just looked at RCP. Trump's up by 1, Biden's up by 3 here. Ultimately, North Carolina is a very interesting state because when it comes to polling, this is a state that tends to favor Democrats in the polling and usually underpolls Republicans, and then on election day, Republicans usually win. They outperform their polling. And I think in this case, we're going to see the same exact effect, same with the Senate race. So right now, I'm going to put North Carolina as lean Republican because I think Trump's going to win it by a similar margin. He could win it by a little less. He could win it by a little more. But if you want to see more about North Carolina, you can check out my swing state video. I have a video on North Carolina if you want more information on it. Georgia is a interesting state, but I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's not as close as these other states we talked about, especially in the yellow or, of course, the lean states. In 2016, Donald Trump won the state by 5.1 percentage points. This is, of course, the smallest margin a Republican has won the state. I believe since 2008. I believe John McCain might have won this state by a smaller margin, but I'm not exactly sure. This is 5.1. Mitt Romney won the state by 7.8, so it went a little bit more blue, but not to a dramatic degree. These margins are kind of expected in Georgia. Even in off-year elections, sometimes the results can get close. But really, where the campaign's focus needs to be is these counties here, the Atlanta suburbs. This area of the state is growing. The rural areas are shrinking, but the rural areas are solidly for Donald Trump, except, of course, these blue counties, which have large African-American populations that are going to back Biden overwhelmingly, and Athens, which is a college town. So ultimately, if we look at the trends, of course, from 2012, a lot of these metro Atlanta counties trended more Democratic. No shock there, but a lot of rural Georgia trended more red, with a few exceptions, and again, no shock there. I think ultimately the margin is going to be roughly the same. I think Trump will win by around 5 points or so. He could win as much as 7. He could win as low as by 2. I don't see Biden flipping the state of Georgia. Again, in 2018, Stacey Abrams was unable to win in this state during a blue wave. And of course, this election is going to have higher Republican turnout and, high Democratic turnout. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, this is going to be a likely Republican state. If we look at polling from Wikipedia on the state of Georgia, Trump's up by 7.5 in the aggregate. The recent poll has Biden up by 1 point, but then again, there's a margin of error, and a lot of the polls have Trump consistently up by a fair amount. I'd say it goes to Trump by around 5 or 6 points, so I'd put this in the likely Republican column. The last state, of course, we have is Florida. And this state has a lot of votes. If we give it to Trump, he is at 249. And, of course, if we give it to Biden, he goes from 212 to 241. So, ultimately, this is a fairly tied map again. But all of these yellow states are completely up for grabs. But Florida could, again, the race could be down to Florida. Although I think, as we're about to see, Florida definitely favors one candidate over another. So if we go back to 2016, of course, Trump won the state of Florida by 1.2. I don't think these percentages are exactly accurate, but the margin is accurate. Trump won it by 1.2 points. This was a state that Obama won by 0.9. So again, his 1.2 point margin, 1.2 percentage point margin, is fairly typical for Florida. This is a state that in presidential races tends to go down to the wire. So again, we're looking at the state of Florida here. If we go to trends from 2012, some of the urban areas trended more blue, a few of the rural counties, but not really. A lot of the blue counties down here, with the exception of Miami-Dade, actually trended slightly more Republican, so that's fairly interesting. That could be due to a number of factors, but ultimately at the end of the day, this is a state that's trended red. If we go to the 2018 midterms, DeSantis won his race fairly comfortably, I guess, for a blue wave year. He won it by 0.5 maybe, 0.7 or 6, something like that. And Rick Scott won his race in a much more of a nail-biter, but the fact that this state went red during the midterms, and if you look, of course, at the popular vote in the Florida State House, State Senate, and House of Reps, it's a state that heavily favors Republicans in that regard. However, we're still going to look at the polling for the state of Florida. We don't have to do that. We could just go to the RCP average. Biden's up by 3.5. Again, I think that's a little ridiculous. I think a lot of these polls are inaccurate, especially this one that has Biden up by 6. I don't really think that's what we're going to see come election day, considering even in 2008, this state was within 2 points. Not going to be a blowout for either candidate, naturally. If we go to the polling, of course, again, some of these polls have Biden up by more. So the most recent polls have Biden up ahead, but again, Trump was consistently ahead in the state previously. But again, this is a state that's all over the place in terms of polling. But based on the 2018 results and, of course, the trends, I'm going to put the state of Florida as leans Republican. And the reason I do that is because most likely this state's going to go red again, purely on the fact that there wasn't really a blue wave here in 2018. Trump support with seniors has waned, but I guarantee you as the crisis comes more to an end, as we begin to reopen, he's going to do better there. But of course, Biden has many paths to victory. And again, I'm going to be making... Biden has many paths to victory here. And my next video is going to be on, of course, the Biden paths for victory and the Trump paths for victory. And we're going to basically pull up this same map and basically determine which states can go what to give each candidate 270 or more. So basically all of the plausible election scenarios that we're going to play out. So if you like this video, please, of course, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you see every new upload. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.